How's it going, everybody? Welcome to FoundFlix. On this Ending Explained, we're looking at Greta, a suspense thriller where a naive young woman makes friends with the titular Greta, who turns out to have a much darker and sinister side than originally thought. Hailing from Neil Jordan, the director behind such notable and well-regarded classics as The Crying Game and Interview with a Vampire, a kind of pulpy thriller seems a bit out of his standard wheelhouse. But his artistic hand does lend a bit more credibility and substance to your fairly typical stalker story, which is helped tremendously by the great Isabelle Huppert as Greta, able to be both warm and friendly as well as sinister and deranged. However, she for the most part is more reserved than might actually be expected, and it's actually up to Grace Moretz to do more of the emotional heavy lifting acting-wise. And the two actresses share a good dichotomy in that sense. They're also joined with Maika Monroe of It Follows in a welcome supporting role as Chloe's goofy bohemian roommate. So while much of the movie is to be applauded, it doesn't ever quite get into a more twisted or over-the-top direction as I would like to see. The end result being a well-done but ultimately fairly dry take on the stalker suspense tale that is more character study than true thriller. And while the ending is pretty straightforward, it does leave things up in the air as far as how things pan out, and does still leave us with many questions as to who Greta is and what caused her to go pretty much cuckoo bananas. So let's check out Greta, breaking down the movie, explaining the ending as well as digging deep into the Greta character to understand what makes her tick. We first meet Frances McCullen working as a waitress, who has recently moved to the Big Apple from Boston, and is perhaps a bit naive to the environment of a big city as we soon see. When taking the subway home, she finds a green handbag left behind, and Frances takes it upon herself to return it to her rightful owner. But I don't know, maybe just try dropping it off at the Lost and Found or something. But she is just trying to do the right thing in her mind, not thinking about any possible dangerous outcomes in the situation. Sure, it's the subway in New York City. There's never anything to be concerned about going on there. Following the address left in the bag, she travels to the woman Greta's house, but she's not home. So she hangs onto the bag for now, telling her roommate Erika about finding it, who by the way somehow owns this amazingly huge loft in Brooklyn. She scolds her friend for taking it in the first place, that this is NYC after all, and that could be a bomb or something. See, she gets it. You can't trust anything in this world nowadays, especially strangers. And of course, we later come to realize how right Erika really is. The friends unwind to go see a movie, which oddly causes Frances to get emotional, revealing that going to the movies was something she and her mother did all the time, and learn that she has recently passed from cancer, leaving a big mom-sized hole in Frances's life. And her dad isn't much help either, completely devoted to his job and already moved on to a new relationship, which is what leaves a perfect opportunity for Greta to step in as her surrogate mother, returning again to her home, and this time they meet, and she thanks Frances for returning the bag, inviting her inside, her hearing some strange pounding noises coming from a wall behind the piano, Greta brushing it off as just being construction going on, turning on some classical music to cover the sounds. Oh sure, construction! I bet, lady! Greta too seems a bit lonely, as her husband died many years ago, and her only daughter Nicola is supposedly across the world in Paris, and the two women form a quick bond based solely on their pain and loneliness. Frances suggests Greta get a new pupper to fill the void, but Greta is still hung up on her previous dog and unwilling to try to replace him. Frances leaves her phone number behind in case she changes her mind, and it doesn't take long to hear from her, Greta calling later that night and asking for help picking out a dog. The next day, selecting the old rescue Morton, snapping a picture of the two together, and Greta looks happy for the first time in a long while, seen actually smiling. From here, the two become more friendly, spending time together to Erika's annoyance, accusing Frances of using Greta to replace her mother, which makes Frances furious, even though that's obviously exactly what she's doing here. Though their seemingly innocent friendship takes a more sinister turn when Frances joins Greta for dinner at her apartment, sending her to fetch wine glasses from a cabinet. Frances opens the wrong one, making a startling discovery: several of the exact same green handbags as she found, with the exact same contents all stowed away. On one, finding a sticky note attached with the name and number for someone called Stephanie Bales, then another sticky note with her own information, meaning that Greta has been leaving these bags on the subway to essentially lure people into her life, anyone with a good enough heart / naive enough to take the bags and return them. But what happened to Stephanie and the other potential names on the other bags? Frances isn't about to find out, at first trying to play it cool, but gets too uncomfortable around Greta, excusing herself and leaving, hoping that she will simply go away. Frances isn't so lucky, as Greta begins to contact her more frequently but gets ignored, forcing her to step up her game, and shows up at the restaurant where Frances works, and she unloads on her about finding the handbags and not wanting to participate in whatever sick game she's up to, telling her to get out of her life and she doesn't ever want to see see her again. This, of course, has the opposite outcome as she was hoping, as Greta begins to stalk Frances more aggressively, starting by standing outside the restaurant for hours on end, creepily watching her from across the street all the way until night falls. And calling a police officer doesn't do much help either, as they say she hasn't technically done anything wrong, and since she's across the street, she's allowed to stand wherever she wants, telling her to just try to ignore her. Now, this would be a perfect time to bring up that other named Stephanie she found in the bags, but for whatever reason she doesn't mention the potential evidence of Greta being up to no good. Things only get more frightening when Greta turns her stalking attention to Erika, sending pictures of her at her exact location on a night out to Frances. She phones her friend urging her to get to safety, as Greta sends more and more pictures, getting even closer to Erika, who somehow doesn't see her despite the pictures being like right behind her. I don't see her. Where could she be? She's literally like 2 feet behind you, dude. Open your eyes. There's no one else in that dank back alley except for you two. Whatever. Even though we think this might be the end for Erika, she manages to outmaneuver Greta and finds Frances in a cab, immediately heading to the police station to file a restraining order against her. After this, Frances is much more worried about what Greta is potentially capable of, and is also fearful of what she might do to her dog Morton, going to her apartment and rummaging through the trash in search of clues. They're discovering a letter from Greta to her daughter, but addressed in New York, not Paris as she claimed, along with it being unopened, marked return to sender. Now, it's not too shocking that she lied, but it opens the potential that everything she thinks she knows about the woman is completely wrong. Using the address in an attempt to contact Nicola, her prior girlfriend Alexa reaches out to Frances, filling us in on what really happened to Greta's daughter. That when they met, she was emotionally scarred by Greta and struggled with what she had done to her, eventually resulting in her committing suicide. And indeed, she had never even been to Paris. Through what Nicola told her about her mother, she knows that Greta is a very sick woman, and actually isn't even French, but Hungarian, putting on a French accent to deflect people from knowing her true heritage. Soon after, things come to a head when Greta returns to the restaurant, making a reservation and everything, trying to make Frances pretend that nothing out of the ordinary is going on, and asserts that she only wants to talk to Frances, but instead going completely mental and making a scene, shattering her wine glass and yelling that their relationship was destiny, and that her mother had to die for them to meet, which is pretty twisted, going even more ham, flipping over the table and lurching towards Frances. The situation diffused by several waitstaff restraining her and getting placed in custody. Though she doesn't stay behind bars too long, Frances learning that she's been released the very next day. As such, she decides the only way forward is to talk to Greta, trying to make things seem like she's not totally freaked out by her behavior, telling her she's going to be going away for a while. Greta understands, giving her an uncomfortably long hug before letting her go. But this appears to only be a ruse, and she was hoping this would be enough for Greta to just leave her alone, but not so much, as Frances at home later has a cup of coffee from an already made batch, which unfortunately has been drugged by Greta, Frances getting dizzy and going catatonic, as Greta appears, scolding Frances for lying about going away, and she drags her back to her apartment, locking her in a toy chest in a room, referred to as the box. While this appears to initially only be a terrible nightmare, after having another nightmare, Frances finds herself definitely locked up in the box, so Greta showing up and drugging her must have actually happened. It seems the box is used as a kind of punishment for Frances lying, and after screaming to be let out, Greta does so, leaving her in a locked room, but also takes her cell phone away, using to make it appear to both her father and Erika that she is with each of them respectively, so no one will come looking for her. Due to this, Frances is essentially held hostage by Greta for a period of a few weeks, being forced to act as her surrogate daughter or face more time in the box. During one heartwarming moment making cookies together, Frances tries for a daring escape. While Greta is busy with a cookie cutter, she slams a rolling pin onto her hand, severing her finger, and makes a break for the door, but finds it locked along with all the windows, sending her down into the basement, where she comes across a nearly dead Stephanie wrapped in a bag, gasping and convulsing before dying in front of her eyes, which allows Greta to get the jump on her from behind, choking her out and returning her to the blocked room behind her piano, this time tying her to the bed. Not getting out this time, sweetie, though perhaps she won't suffer the same fate as Stephanie, as her father and Erika finally finally figure out something isn't right when talking, learning how Frances told them she was with the other respectively, though wasn't actually with either. Her father is now fearful about her real whereabouts and hires a private investigator named Cody to track her down. He's got some more inside scoop on the real Greta thanks to her case file, that she used to work as a nurse, allegedly mistreating and killing her patients, until being fired for misuse of sedatives. And it was believed that after this she returned to her mother country of Hungary, which we know she didn't do, allowing her to be under the radar since leaving the hospital. Cody then makes his way to Greta's apartment to investigate her firsthand, and when hearing her name mentioned on the other side of the wall, Frances tries to make her presence known, banging on the bed to get a metronome on the piano to come to life. As Cody gets within feet of finding her, Greta appears, injecting him in the neck with a sedative, causing him to lose his focus, until falling to the floor paralyzed. Rather than imprisoning him, she asks if he has children. When saying no, she replies, "Good, then no one will miss you," taking his gun and firing repeatedly on Cody, and proceeds to dance around the room joyously to her non-stop classical soundtrack. A moment of sheer absurdity that I really wish we saw more of in the movie, before placing his body in a bag and dumping it in the basement with Stephanie. Well, that didn't turn out so well, Mr. P.I. Man. And it appears that after this, Frances will soon be joining the others in the basement, as Greta goes out in search of her next victim, starting her selection process all over again of leaving behind a bag on the subway to lure another do-gooder. And it works like a charm, a young woman with curly brown hair taking the bait. Inviting her in for coffee, the two have a nice friendly chat. As Greta steps away for a moment, we see drops of something being placed into one of the cups, which turns out to be Greta's. Taking a drink and quickly feeling disoriented. That's because you got punked this time, Greta, as the woman removes her wig, revealing herself to be Erika, who had been scouring the subway in search of another handbag in order to set up and find Greta. As she falls unconscious, Frances begins banging furiously, bringing the metronome to life and cluing Erika into her location. She pushes the piano out of the way, finding the secret room and setting Frances free. The two hug, thinking they're safe, until a record again starts playing outside. Greta hasn't given up quite yet. Stepping out carefully into the apartment, Greta grabs Frances by the throat, calling her her favorite one, then finally succumbing to the sedative and passing out. Erika, about to seize the opportunity to bash Greta's brains in, Frances stops her, saying she has a better idea, tossing Greta into the box and jamming an Eiffel Tower replica in the latch to keep her inside. The final scene, seeing Greta awaken and banging on the top of the box, and starting to get the replica loose, looking like she is about to get out as the movie concludes. Even though it makes it look like she's about to get out, I really hope Frances and Erika, or really Frances, have learned their lesson here and call the police immediately when getting out of the apartment. But considering how many boneheaded choices they made so far, I suppose there is the potential that they just ran off, so Greta could actually get out and disappear to somewhere else as she has done before. But I'm really leaning towards the former, so even if she could get out, that her crazy and desperate attempts to replace her own daughter are at their end, and she will be going to jail for quite some time. At least they have proof at this point of what she's been up to. So I'd say the biggest question in the end is just what led Greta down this path to kidnapping and murder. From what I can gather, it seems to have begun with losing her husband all those many years ago. As she described, he was the one that enjoyed playing the piano, and his death was a surprise and shock to Greta, something that she never obviously recovered from, though perhaps she already had a few screws loose, tying back to her working as a nurse and abusing and potentially killing some of her patients before being fired, which assumingly would be where she gets the sedatives from. So with only her daughter Nicola left in her life, she grew increasingly protective to a disturbing degree to make sure that she never left Greta. Her daughter's room must be the one behind the piano, and she was the one the box was initially created for. As I said, a kind of punishment if she ever disobeyed or tried to leave. Eventually, Nicola was able to escape her mother's grasp, but was also completely psychologically damaged by the experience. But Greta would fare even worse after this, losing the last part of her family. And this led to her becoming dangerously desperate and lonely, resulting in the construction of the bag on the subway ruse to lure in a daughter replacement, which, as we've seen, usually doesn't turn out so well for the girls. Though I do wonder what would happen if they don't try to get away from her. Sure, she's weird and murderous and everything, but it also wasn't until Frances tried to sever ties that Greta got more hostile. So maybe if she just went along with what Greta wanted, even if it would be an inconvenience, at least it would avoid the potential of getting kidnapped or killed. Just something to think about. This brings us to the conclusion of this ending explained on Greta. Overall, I did enjoy it, even though it did feel perhaps a little flat and didn't quite deliver on the potential for craziness that I hope to see the story go. It was still competently made and well crafted, and definitely worth a watch if for nothing else for Isabelle Huppert's simultaneously reserved and unhinged performance as Greta.
Oh, Greta, you made it out of the box, eh?
Au revoir, Monsieur FoundFlix.
But I thought you were Hungarian, not French. Ow! Oh! I deserved it. Ow! Oh! Ow!
I'm bleeding. Oh, it's right on my corpse. Ouch. Nice moves though. You're a natural. What did you guys think of Greta and its ending? Do you think she'll escape the box at the end? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Make sure to like, subscribe, and follow. Thanks for watching FoundFlix. See you next time.